So welcome everyone. So in the background, you are listening to the soundtrack of High Fidelity. I don't know if there are any film buffs among you, but it was a 2000 film starring John Cusack as a kind of a passionate a music geek, and also a very fond of making lists. So he, in the film, the whole film is structured around his top 5 lists, where he's listing, his top favorite books, his top 5 worst breakups, his top 5 favorite songs about death, dream jobs, literally he has a top 5 about everything. And it seems like we were joking when we were planning this event that we are some kind of list making, loving people as well. So my name is Cristina Bazzidu, and I am a research fellow for the Creatures project, which is basically seeking to articulate how creative practices contribute to what we call eco-social sustainability. And a large part of our work, of course, is mapping creative practices and the kind of techniques that they use. So that's my colleague Lara that is here. She will talk more about the work that she's been leading on that. And together with Plurality University, with Chloe and Daniel, we came together around our common hobby, and we decided to organize this event to kind of bring together other people who are also curating collections of creative practices, narratives, projects, and kind of exchange ideas on our motivations, practices, and kind of ambitions with engaging in this type of work. So I will now pass on to Chloe, so that she's going to say a little bit more about how this event kind of connects to a kind of series of ongoing work that is taking place, and then we will start with having a kind of really short presentations of about 6 minutes from the different speakers. So I will just tell you the list so that we don't have to introduce everyone every time, but then just make sure that it goes in a little bit fast pace, and so that we can have as much time for discussion at the end as possible. So as I said, Chloe will introduce the project, and then Daniel, he will talk about the library of alternative narratives that Plurality University is building up. Then Summer van Houten will talk about the Portoland project. Kelly Rose Pearson will talk about the Reimaginary project. Diego Galafasi and David Tabara will talk about their arts for sustainability transformations. Romain Juillard and Jeffrey Lavin will talk about the Mosaic project. Louis Kunin-Roa about the Library of Creative Sustainability. Gary Peterson for the Seeds of Good Anthropocene. And finally, Lara Houston, she will say a few words about the Creatures Observatory, which is also launching today. So congratulations, Lara. And with that, Chloe, you want to go next?
Yes. So hi everyone. It's great to finally do this. So I'm just going to say a few words about the Plurality University. So we're an international network that's based in France. We're an open network, and we implement collaborative projects, public events, and we provide support for different forms of co-production, sharing, debating visions, approaches for the alternative presents and futures, and from different cultures, practices, and disciplines, which is the plurality part. So in 2021, we launched a project in order to respond to this recurring call for new narratives, which Daniel will discuss further in a few minutes. And one lesson that we've learned from this first year was that how and by whom narratives were either produced, used, discussed, received was as important as their content. And that's when we started this work around collective practices, and we realized that many groups, such as Creatures, were working around this notion of collective practices and working creatively with narratives, which we say narratives in a very broad sense, as a base for transformation, so ecological, social, economical transformation of reality. And so this event is really part of our monthly encounters that we'll be having for the next year that we call Agoras. And we co-organized it with the Creatures, so Lara and Christina. And I think we share this, I'm just letting someone in, with whom I think we really share this similar importance of this notion of sharing experiences, methods, to start slowly developing, common source of knowledge, to experiment and to learn from each other and our practices, and to start reflecting on common questions that we might have. So, and talking about common questions, because we were reflecting, were many more than we thought we would be, because we didn't think so many people would be interested in list making. So this is great. And just to precise, so at the end, we have a good time to answer questions, but maybe just answering questions in a concise way to let everyone ask their questions, so that we have time to really develop. And so without further ado, I'm going to let Daniel start, and I'm recording it. So please don't hate me if I cut you, or I'll try to do it in a very soft way, because I know it's really annoying when someone just kind of breaks your flow. But it's a picha kucha, so we don't have the choice. And so, Daniel, are you ready? Okay, I'm starting.
Ready.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so as Chloe said, when we started this project for Narratopias, the first thing that we thought about the call for new narratives is that if by new narratives people are calling for stories or other kinds of creations that can sort of help us achieve changes we're currently incapable of doing, or changing dynamics of domination and so on, the first thing we thought was there's actually quite a lot of those narratives around. And so we decided we should start by collecting them. And this is what gave birth to the library of transformative narratives. So we created an initial platform with the help of a group called l'Atelier des Chercheurs, which is like the researchers' workshop, where we entered works of fiction, visual arts, speculation, design, and so on that we knew of. So the initial tool was, looked a little bit like that. And we collected about 230 of those stories. So not just us, but actually we did other things. We organized a series of workshops to collect narratives. So people would basically join and bring in the stories and creations that they found inspiring towards possible transformations. And we sort of discussed them, pasted them, clustered them, and so on. And then they went into the library. So that was the purpose, and this is what happened last year. And so the platform, which is soon going to be launched in this new version, which is a little more usable when there's a few hundred stories in it. It's also collaborative, so anybody can add a story. We made sure that you could actually add story and for a while edit them without having to enter any kind of personal information. So you don't even have to register. And we took a risk, which was not calculated, but we were right, because nobody's entered anything that was not relevant. So you can still do that. And so that's the general idea of the platform. So first of all, what do we call a story? What do we mean by story, or what we call now transformative narrative? This definition is the result of quite a lot of iterations between among the team. And this is the one that we're sort of comfortable with now, but we had to progressively remove the new from new narratives, for example, because again, there's a lot of existing narratives that are just ignored, and they're important as well. We have to remove the obligatory reference to futures, because you can change things by changing views of the present or even of the past. We played with the idea of desirable, and we thought that what I desire may be so different from what you desire that maybe just imposing that was not helpful at all. So yeah, this is the definition that we have. And we give a few other elements so that people who want to collaborate feel at ease in choosing different kinds of media, different kinds of work, their works or others, and so on. But this is basically, this is what you can find in the calls for collaboration, basically. Now, this corpus is organized in 3 different ways. Categories are created by us, and they will have to be redone because they're completely ad hoc at this stage. But basically, the idea would be that they would provide a very basic classification of the content. So you can, we create the categories, you choose one. And so we'll probably go down the way of something very simple, like, is this literature? Is this visual arts? Is this design? Put it into the box where it fits better, and that's it. Then keywords are entered by people. They're totally free. We just give it a little help when they start typing. We'll give them all the keywords that have already been entered, and that start with those same letters. But if they want to write it otherwise, that's fine with us. And there's something new that we haven't tried yet with real users, which we call collections, which are basically assemblages of stories that anybody can gather for whatever reasons, because they want to create a sub-corpus, because they want to do a workshop, because they think that our categories don't work at all, whatever. So this is really basically how it's done. Just to give you an idea, an entry can consist of text, images, links, embedded sound or video, downloadable files, and you can organize them in any way you want. So, basically, when you decide that you want to enter something, you tell us, you tell the system what kind of entry it is. It'll come in, then you can move it up and down. And so we have some very, very short entries with a link and a comment, and we have some very long ones with different bits of text, excerpts, a trailer video, a story, a cover image, and so on. We have a few full short stories, even one in Chinese, but it reads fairly well with Google Doc, apart from probably the style, but yeah. And just to finish, and I hope I'm within the 6 minutes, this is also a tool. It's an open source tool called Corpora, so developed by this group called l'Atelier des Chercheurs with us, which basically can allow anyone to create their own corpuses using those kinds of mechanisms with their own categories and a number of other criteria. So there's already a number. We use it for more thematic corpuses as well, on the future of work, clothes, food, etc.
Thank you, Daniel. I also I'm giving 1 minute grace because I think.
No, I don't need it.
No, I know, but I gave it to you already because
you gave it. Okay.
I realized that so Summer is not here for the Portolan project, so this gives us a little extra minute. So up to 7 minutes for those of you who take a bit more time. And so we're going to continue with Kelly Rose Pearson, who is going to introduce the Reimaginary project.
Okay, thank you. And I think Laura was going to present my slides because I had some technical difficulties and my computer is failing. So I'm on my phone.
Great.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, and so great to see all these different projects. Just really exciting to have these connections. My name is Kelly, and I'm just finishing my PhD in transformative imagination and arts-based practices for transformative engagement. And a group of us from the SUS Place Marie Curie program, which stands for Sustainable Place Shaping, started experimenting with creative methods really for a couple of reasons. You can go to the next slide. Really, we wanted to feel enlivened with our research and our practices. So we thought about combining the pragmatic and the enchanting. And we wanted to activate transformative mindsets. So go ahead. We realized that a lot of our research around different aspects of sustainable place shaping, that it is not easy to deal scientifically with feelings, as our famous friend Sigmund Freud once said. And go ahead. We also wanted to include a multiplicity of perspectives and different non-human stakeholders. And we strongly believe that, go ahead, that in enacting sustainability transformations, we really need to focus on change from the inside out, as Karen O'Brien has said. So engaging with the deeper beliefs, values, worldviews, emotions, etc., which I'm sure everybody here recognizes and is engaged with in different ways, which is very exciting. And go ahead. Most of all, we were just excited to feel our brains on, this is my image of your brain on creative methods, sparking different ways of looking at things and creating new synaptic connections, etc., and just feeling engaged and enlivened by the world. Go ahead. And we also took the perspective that creative methods are neutral, that you can do anything creatively. So you can have an arts-based method that makes you design the most amazing machine to destroy a forest, as well as you can use an arts-based method to come up with creative ideas of how to engage social ecological systems to nurture and regenerate the forest. So we really wanted to link all of our creative methods to deeper transformative mindsets. Go ahead. So these are the different elements of our creative methods. So we have our different types of creative practices, different types of intelligence, somatic intelligence, kinetic intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, etc. And we wanted to make sure that we engaged all sorts of different marginalized stakeholders, from the non-human to youth to minority communities, etc., and how to bring them into the creative practices. And then once again, focusing on that transformative mindsets. You can go ahead. So these are some examples. I'm not going to go into them. You can read the article, go to our website. But looking at sustainability from a regenerative perspective rather than a reducing harm perspective, increasing our ability to sense different dimensions of time from long-term to short-term, everywhere in between, focusing on place-based, recognizing that we can proceed with uncertainty in these dynamic, complex systems, and looking at different levels of intersectionality, etc. So go ahead. So at the Transformations Conference in 2017, the 6 of us got together and we experimented with a bunch of different practices, which we then put together in a toolkit. And the toolkit was so well received and people were so enthusiastic about it that we really wanted to keep it more of a living, expandable platform for gathering different types of methods. So we turned it into a website. You can go ahead. Called Reimaginary. And you can get a copy of that, of the original toolkit on the website as well. So here we collected different resources and methods, and go ahead. We organized them by different places in the U, which is Basin Theory U. So, and then we organized them by random tags that we found interesting and engaging. So go ahead. So the primary organization is around Theory U, which many of you have probably heard about. It's based as a way of organizing different transformative and change focused engagements. And it's based out of MIT, the Presencing Institute. So we have methods that focus on the convening part of the engagement, the observing part, the taking time to reflect, moving into action, and then harvesting and consolidating insights. Go ahead. So here's just a couple examples of some methods, and each method has an overall description and kind of detailed instructions and different types of tips and materials that you might need. Go ahead. And then we welcome methods from really anybody, and these are just we wanted to focus on not just creative methods, but somehow methods that are aligned with specifically with the transformative methods and sustainability. So here are just a list of the types of criteria or alignments that we ask when people think about submitting creative methods. And that's it.
Great, thank you so much.
Yep.
It was right on time.
Kelly.
Yes.
Great.
Perfect.
Right on. Wonderful.
So next,
Thanks.
we have Diego Garafassi and David Tabara introducing Arts for Sustainability Transformations.
Can you hear me? Can you see my page? Is there just a feedback there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
great, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks for having us. It's really fantastic seeing old friends and people we're just meeting. My name is Diego Galafassi, and I'm here with David Tabara, my colleague. I just would like to also mention our colleagues Emily Boyd and Maria Harris, who have been part of this project we are presenting, which we call Arts for Sustainability Transformations. And we come into this space very much from sustainability science perspective. And I also have a practice within film and emerging media. And well, we prepare something that really has to do with the catalog in particular. So we don't have a thorough presentation of the project itself, but we're happy to talk about that in the discussion. So over the years, we have been working in this interface between arts and sustainability science from both sort of an analytical perspective, looking at these projects at a larger scale, but also from a very practical and engaged perspective. So we had projects with performances, with children, with emerging media, and so forth. And back in 2017, we did our first catalog, so to speak, as we call it, and that has been published in this article that we can shed reference later on. And that was a project that we were trying to understand the climate arts landscape. So we went out and we selected about 102 art projects, and by art projects we mean networks or projects that have some kind of continuity in time, and also artworks, so in particular instances of art, climate arts, and that covered more or less between 2000 and 2016. And we used internet searches, and this is, I just copied here some of the sort of descriptive elements that we had for that catalog. And just like the previous projects, we also had some analytical categories that we used for it. We tried to understand what is the key narrative around the project, what are some the elements. We wanted to understand whether the project was about awareness or knowledge integration or mobilization and so forth. So again, I could share the reference, and it's described there in the paper, and how we sort of made sense of that catalog. Then further from that, we got a grant to actually expand beyond the climate arts and look at other art forms and understanding the role that it might play in the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. So here, again, we proposed another catalog, but this time we wanted to explore this idea of an open catalog. So really advertise and get submissions by anybody really that could submit projects. Alongside, we did a survey. So we submitted a request for different networks, and from that survey, then we created some in-depth interviews and some portrait films around specific projects that were mentioned in the survey, or sort of the most reoccurring projects. We ended up creating these short film portraits that, again, you could also see in the website. So that's what we call this living catalog. And obviously along the way, we figure out how difficult that is and the challenges in terms of maintenance and the continuity of these catalogs and some of the things that I'm sure everybody that is working on that space has encountered as well. Finally, just to mention the last things that we are working at the moment, we're focusing on a project called Wild Tech, where we are looking at the role of emerging media in sustainability transformations. And again, here we have a process of engagement with these different projects and trying to get a sense for what this field looks like. It's moving very rapidly, of course. And we want to sort of engage both from the sort of more overview perspective, but also from a very practical perspective. So again, thank you everybody for putting this, for being here today, and for the organizers to bring us together. I think it's really timely to try to think about what are some of the synergies, some of the connections between the projects, and how do we support each other really. David, David, would you like to comment anything at this point? Sorry, I had another. Go ahead.
No, finish.
Yeah, I was just saying that I already mentioned some of these challenges that we faced. A couple of things that I didn't mention was this idea of how do we create value for artists in some ways. We are, cataloging this work, but what's in it for artists and for practitioners out there? And then the final point is, how do we turn that information that we collected into actionable knowledge? And I think some of the projects that are here also are really answering and really struggling with that question, and that's really great. So thanks again. Go ahead, David, sorry about that.
No, but just 1 minute if I have, just to mention that I'm particularly interested, and we are particularly interested in this idea of transforming science. This idea, basically because of the limitations of conventional tools and methods to gather diverse types of knowledges and creating different ways of learning and alternative ways of learning. So I think that's an important aspect. And basically that's it, because we are interested in cultural transformations, and that's why we're here.
Great, thank you so much. Right on time. So, oh, here's the timer. You're actually before time. Sorry. So next we have Romain Julliard and Geoffrey Lavigne that are going to be introducing Mosaic.
Hello. Yes. So it will be two voice. So I'm not. Mosaic is a team developing platforms for others, and where can I find it? Okay. And it's not about big data and artificial intelligence, but more about quality data and collective intelligence. And I will show an example of what we are doing. We are not yet working on archiving narratives, but that's the project we have with Geoffrey. So the maybe quite far example, it's about quite typical citizen science, but with instrumental protocol. It's called Hedgehog Mission, and the objective is to record in standardized way activity of hedgehogs in participants' gardens with this kind of device, which is a tunnel trap for footprints, which the participant has to build. set in his garden for 5 consecutive nights, and every morning he will record a sort of narrative actually, but produced by animals, which are footprints of the kind of animals that went through the tunnel. And participants will identify what kind of animal was there, like a cat or hedgehog or small mammals or whatever. And everyone is then allowed to validate or comments or make other suggestions around it. And that works pretty well in a bit more than a year. We have nearly 1,500 active participants and 10,000, nearly 10,000. That's the latest figures. And that's typical of the kind of citizen science we are designing, where, as you may see, it's a quite engaging protocol for participation. It's not just a picture and send it and stuff. It's something that really is engaging, and that we have this experience that engaging protocol is really a good way to fidelize and have active participants. And the other lesson is the importance of the social platform of participation. We encourage people participants to comment and suggest and exchange around the data produced by each others. That proved to be a really very powerful way to have participants on the long term, but also to have participants that develop sense of belonging in a community of contributors and develop all sorts of activities. So Mosaic is really a team helping others to develop such kinds of projects. Let's keep that, you may read it. And now I let Geoffrey, if you can say a few words about this.
Yes, just a word about CSF. CSF is a committee science fiction. It's a program of the National Museum of Natural History and the Institute of Ecological Transition. This program is about imagining other relationships between human societies and living worlds. And each year, around 20 students from Sorbonne University take part in this workshop. It's the third edition, I know. The first one, it was about nature in the city. The second one, it was about alimentation, and the third one was about communication between species, interspecies communication. So each year, yes, we would do three kinds of workshop. Is a literary workshop about science fiction. The second one is about artists or graphic workshop, and the third one is a theater workshop. So we have three kind of practice, and with this kind of practice, we create like a world about the future of relationships between human and living world. So today we want to create like a platform to share these narratives, students' narratives, and the methodologies. So it's why we want to work with Mosaic today. Maybe you can introduce more what we want to do, Romain?
Yeah. So yes. So just the last slide is the really work in progress. The idea is that there is a kind of two actors. The one that designed this methodology, these protocols, how to engage students in writing short text or acting plays or designing plays or whatever. So that's what we call protocols. And it's more designed by the artist or the scientist that coordinates the group. And then each protocol maybe have a different realization by different group of students or group of participants. And then each realization is described by who has done it. And that may be different participants. And what is important is that everything may be a comment or so that social interaction are developed on the platform among the different kind of participants. So I said it's really work in progress. So it's very theoretical, and it may change entirely change before it's eventually done. Okay, I hope I didn't spend too much time for this. Thanks. Chloe, your mic is off.
I'm sorry, I was just saying it was right on time, so it's perfect. Thank you very much. So next we have Louis Conan-Rowe introducing the Library of Creative Sustainability.
Hi, yes.
Yes,
share
that is
my
you.
screen. Sometimes it takes a while to get there. Hopefully that's visible.
Yes, it's visible.
Great. So I'm Lewis. I work at Creative Carbon Scotland, which is a charity based in Scotland, working on the roles of arts and culture in addressing climate change and related issues. I'm going to talk a bit about a resource we run called the Library of Creative Sustainability. So this is a set of case studies which try to show the benefits of collaborations between artists and people working in environmental sustainability. The emphasis is quite practical. It's really trying to help people understand how they could take on similar work themselves. And it tries to be quite detailed. So the case studies in this library are all relatively large. They go into quite a lot of detail about things like funding, practicalities, stakeholders involved, links to further information. And they're quite chunky and involved pieces, each one. As a result, it's a relatively tight resource still. I think there's 22 articles in there, but they're all relatively large. We set this up back in 2018 in response to, I think, a few issues that we were having ourselves. So we were looking to try and promote this kind of practice in Scotland. So trying to promote more projects that involve active collaborations between people working on climate change and artists and creative practitioners. And it felt like there were lots of good examples of projects to point to, but difficulty finding that sort of detailed information we wanted to put out there, particularly this kind of thing about practicalities and process. So there was quite a lot of information about the outputs, what happened at the end, how everything looked fantastic, but didn't show you how you actually got to that stage, how you got set up, what the process was like, what the difficulties involved were. And we also wanted to promote certain types of practice. So I think quite a lot of people here, we're interested in longer term projects that involve deep collaboration, projects where the outcomes aren't necessarily predetermined from the start. So we were looking for this particular type of work and wanting to provide a platform to put that out there a bit more. And I think an important secondary goal of making this library was we ourselves wanted to make more connections. So we wanted to get in touch with the people who were doing these interesting projects, make connections, see if we could promote their work in other ways, see if there are ways we could work together. So I think that's kind of important to note. There was that other practical goal to it as well. It started off by just doing a survey of potential projects, so a desk-based survey, kind of looking at keywords, going through contacts and contacts of contacts to make a kind of just a massive spreadsheet of options. We then worked with a steering group of people coming from the cultural sector and from climate research and outreach to work on the style and the content of the library, as well as the kind of the articles we wanted to initially start off with. And important to note the influence of Frances Whitehead and her embedded artist concept on the whole stance of the library, that we wanted to promote this particular type of practice where artists were embedded deeply into projects and worked throughout the process, rather than looking at projects where artists were brought in at the end to communicate something, for example, which is important too, but just not the type of practice we were particularly interested in promoting. And the audiences for the library, I think the main audience is this quite practical one. So basically anyone who could take on similar projects themselves. So environmental organizations and agencies, artists and other creative practitioners, NGOs, government bodies, etc. And then there's this important secondary audience of researchers, funders, policymakers, anyone who can help play this, basically the same role as we're trying to take in promoting and mainstreaming this kind of practice. So when choosing case studies, there are a few different thoughts at play. One was that we wanted the examples we picked to be examples of categories, not standalone things. And by that, I mean, we didn't want to say, here's one great masterwork work of art. We wanted to say, this is like one example of a type of approach. There are other things like this. You could do this yourself. So we wanted to make it approachable and something that could be replicated. We were also looking to get coverage across different categories. So projects that took place in different types of locations, looked at different issues, involved different organizations, involved people in different ways. And an increasing priority for us is to look for examples outside of the UK and the US. So when we were initially setting up the library, a lot of the examples we found tend to come from this Anglophone global North background. We're trying to look beyond that now and try to find examples which are more diverse and coming from different perspectives, because I think there's a lot to be learned from other places that we haven't been able to cover so far. In terms of what the library actually looks like, this is the sort of rough layout of it with these tiles. So there's a little summary on each one, and you click on it, it takes you to the full article, and then you can filter it by these 4 different filters that we have at the top. I think it's worth noting what kind of filters we didn't include. So we chose not to include, for example, the names of artists or different artistic disciplines, because we wanted to put the emphasis somewhere a bit different. So you can filter it by what types of environmental issues you want to look at, by the types of location, by the ways people were involved, by the types of organizations, but not by types of artistic practice, for example, because we really wanted to put more emphasis on reaching audiences coming from outside of the arts, coming from sort of environmental sustainability perspectives. And we were trying to find ways that would maybe communicate to that audience a bit more, which I think is an audience that we've struggled to reach effectively in the past. And I think part of that was this kind of rough style guide that we operate on. So each article tries to be written in a way which is equally relevant to people coming from cultural and climate expertise. And as part of that, we try to combine these sort of more measurable scientific forms of success, which these projects represent, as well as less tangible things alongside each other. Try to use non-sector specific language. We try to show, don't tell. So we try to not use too many adjectives and adverbs and just put things out there in a way that just expresses what happens. And I think as part of that as well, we try to include messiness and setbacks. So we don't try to just give the polished final product, but also show the realities of what the process can be like, which is often messy and difficult. Finally, I'll just show you what one article looks like. So this is the rough layout with a kind of introduction at the start, images, full article starts at the bottom of that screenshot. And then at the side, we include the keywords showing the different categories, as well as the technical information on things like location and dates. And then as you go down, there are various sections, so kind of including things like partners and stakeholders, what sustainability issues were addressed, quotes, and then go down to the bottom, links to further resources. And just to note, I don't believe in build it and they will come. We have done a lot of work trying to promote this resource to people working in environmental and climate perspectives, and a lot of that work is done through things like guest blogs and features that we've managed to get in places outside of the arts. And I think that's something that I'm trying to do more and more, is to actively go to different places like scientific research or outreach professionals and try to reach those people directly. That's it.
Thank you very much, Lewis. That's great. Thank you. Next, we have Gary Peterson introducing the seeds of good Anthrocenes.
All right. Hi. So I'm going to talk about the Seeds of the Good Anthropocene project, and this is like a fairly loosely networked project that also Yust, who's on this call, has also been involved with, but I'm going to present my sort of version of it. And our project comes from the perspective of thinking about the future, and it was basically started sort of from Elena Bennett, Unsi Biggs, and I, all who've worked on global assessments and creating these scientific futures. And we're based on the idea that the vision of the people have of the future shapes their activities now and helps co-create the future. However, most especially popular imaginaries of the future, movies, books, films, are incredibly negative. They're these kind of Mad Max bad Anthrocenes, and they don't help people imagine pathways towards the future. And these scientific narratives are also kind of sterile and smooth, while the world, as obviously we're living in right now, is bumpy and turbulent and unexpected. And so we really had the goal of trying to improve the diversity of futures and create better tools to create scientific scenarios. And we did this basically saying, well, let's go and look at the real world, the existing world, which existing things that actually exist in the world are often more radical than what people are imagining in these environmental scenarios. And so that's how we come into collecting. Oops, I jumped there. So we're focused on what we call seeds, the idea of something that can grow into something that's desirable in the future. And we are focused specifically on the social ecological, of how people are connected to nature. And so there can be more social things or more ecological things, but we're focused on that connection. And we're also explicitly focused on that people can disagree about what's good for the future, whether nuclear is great or small scale pastoralism is great. We're interested in the disagreement, but we want things that are in some way within this donut of within environmental and social limits. So seed, existing, something that exists, that's a way of doing thing or a project that is marginal. That's a bit subjective, but it means it's not like Amazon or Apple, but at least in some sense, the world it's at the margins, so it can grow, and that some people think it can contribute to things. So some quick examples of different perspectives. River resurfacing in the downtown Seoul in Korea, which not only regreened the downtown, but actually triggered changes in traffic and walkability throughout Korea. Totally different one, backing up global seed banks in Norway, using some of their fossil money to provide backup copies of global seed banks that immediately proved its worth when in the Syrian war, a giant seed bank in the CG system was severely damaged, but backups of it were at Svalbard. Guayhanas Park in Canada, where the Haida Nation, Indigenous people in Canada, made their own park and basically got the Canadian government to, or the Canadian government then agreed that they would co-manage this with the Haida. This is something that's been copied by other First Nations in Canada. And the Foundation of Ecological Security in India, which works with marginalized people to both restore land and to develop institutions to make sure that land isn't expropriated by local elites once it becomes more prosperous. So those are kind of seeds we're interested in. We have three main activities, which is seed comparison analysis, developing scenarios and trying to catalyze transformation. I'll talk briefly about all of these, but focus on the seed comparison and collection, because that's what we're talking about. So we have a whole bunch of different collections because we didn't aim to have a collection at the beginning. We wanted to have seeds to use for scenarios. We have a website that has a description, nowhere near as organized as the last talk, of different seeds. And we have a bunch of thematic seeds that we've collected and analyzed, ranging from more scientific analysis to Yust has done work with a game on mobile apps where students collect seeds in Utrecht. And we're currently working on peace seeds with development partners and a project on African food seeds. Those are bigger things. And we're trying now to develop a more systematic, modular, and flexible coding system to help us scientifically analyze the seeds, because we're scientists working on this project. And we've also developed a set of kind of seeds cards for workshops, and I'm interested in kind of developing this kind of playing cards further. So we do these scientific analyses, both looking at kind of what are things that seeds address, done this with like the SDGs, and also about how seeds are actually contributing to transformation, connecting our work to research on transformation and kind of trying to operationalize and test that research. We've also used these seeds by mashing them together to try and grow new futures. And this is also based on transformation theory of thinking about combining different types of innovations, often from different perspectives and different values, is how real change has happened in the past. And we've been using that, especially Laura Pereira and I have been using that in the international or intergovernmental platform biodiversity ecosystem services, which is trying to develop positive futures for nature. And we're especially interested in tensions and synergies and how positive trajectories can emerge through those synergies in our scenarios. And then we actually do this to try and work with local actors to catalyze local sustainability transformations based again on kind of transition theory. It's the idea that big change often comes from below, but this can be captured or crushed by the large. So how can you enable it to bubble up? We've mostly done this with food. One of the examples of this is working with seeds, artists, and I'm saying in quotes, which in our case has mostly been chefs and designers, to kind of imagine how they could work together to create a new food future in the Stockholm region. So that's the kind of thing of both, we're trying to catalyze transformation by connecting people together with seeing how their goals align for future change. So this is not just me, this is a big partnership. I think the main hubs are at McGill, Utrecht with Joost and others, and at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, but includes a whole bunch of other people at other places around the world. We have a website that's sort of but you can find a lot of stuff on it, including our publications. We also have Twitter. And just one last thing, another project I have is trying to collect a community of practice around social ecological scenarios. And that's a collection of scenarios with methods and examples to help people learn from that. So that, I'll stop. And I'm really excited with what I've heard. And I hope we get a chance to talk a little bit more later on. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. Next, we have Lara Houston that's going to be introducing the Creatures Observatory. Oh, Lara, you're on mute.
Okay, and hopefully everyone sees my slides. So welcome everyone. My name is Lara Houston and I'm also presenting on behalf of Anne Light, who's in the audience with us. And we're presenting a piece of work called the Creatures Observatory very quickly. The key question for Creatures is, how do creative practices contribute to sustainable transformations? And we're really thinking about the kind of key characteristics or qualities of creative works. For example, these could be aesthetic qualities, works could be embodied or multisensory, but they could also be ontological, so creating new spaces to rethink existing orders and maybe to create some new ones. So in the project, we focus on creative practices that produce experiences rather than artifacts, but that is still a huge field. Within our group, within our consortium group, we have artists, designers, and social change makers and researchers. We've also chosen quite an expanded definition of sustainability that we call eco-social, basically to sort of claim a more complex role for the social than in prior approaches like behavior change and information deficit models. So we're kind of just expanding the social a little bit. So I'm gonna reshare to the website. Here we go. Okay, so basically with this expanded field in mind, we used 4 different methods to kind of make cuts in different ways. Firstly, we're lucky enough inside the Creatures project to work with our partners who are creative practitioners, and they're making creative works for the duration of the project and sharing their process with us. So we really get to have an in-depth understanding of what creative practitioners are doing around eco-social sustainability. So that's one way to get cases into this collection. The second way has been actually, I interviewed my colleagues and asked them to nominate cases that were transformative to them. And this was very interesting because people put into the corpus transformative friendships and books that they read, whereas I think we had a more dry idea of a case will always be a project or an artwork. And these interviews were really important for a second reason, because they highlighted distinctions between our colleagues in sustainability who think about transformations as kind of multi-year changes to systems from states A to B, and creative colleagues who are kind of thinking about changing relations. So who and what is being transformed. So not like a relations rather than a systems kind of perspective, which I think has been really important in the project. We've also gathered some cases from literature reviews, and that's how I've met and found some of the lovely participants here. And we also did some top-down mapping. You can see here, thinking about where our cases come from and the parts of the world that they don't come from, and the kind of creative fields that they represent and also that they don't represent. So having gathered these kind of 160 cases, it was time to analyze them. And I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint. So basically what we've used this case corpus to generate first is this idea of transformative strategies. So what do creative practitioners do to set up conditions that they think will be conducive to change? And we've got about 25 of these in total. So things like building prefigurative formations, or using making practices to create atmospheres of listening and reflection, restaging, using time to look back at and say, well, what was transformation with this lens? Thinking about investigation and aesthetics. I mentioned before these amazing transformative friendships that people have. Tuning into ecological connectedness and transformative pedagogy. And basically what we've done is now we realized that this crazy mind map of mine, this sort of case corpus that I've shown, isn't actually very helpful for new people arriving and coming to this network map. So we've started to pick each one of our transformative strategies to match it with the case here from the map, and then to write up a kind of blog post, pretty much like Lewis's approach, and to kind of, create these more journalistic cases that kind of explain a little bit. So we're moving from ideas around creative, using making for atmospheres of reflection and listening. Then our case is a case called Remendar lo Nuevo, Mending the New by Tania Perez Bustos, which talks about how textile making practices help people to think about ecological and social reconciliation in post-conflict Colombia. And really, we're kind of using video again, like Diego, because we really feel that listening to a creative practitioner talk about work that they really care about is kind of one of the most engaging ways to understand what's significant about these practices. So yeah, that's it from Creatures. I just want to say a huge thank you. It's been an amazing kind of set of just explosions. I think Kelly's photo of the brain in her slide with like this mass of things growing out of it has been the experience that I've had listening to you all. And I want to say that we're now transitioning into the question and answer part of the event, we have, yeah, about 50 minutes for questions and answers. So we can just maybe take a little stretch and just, you can shift your bodies around, and it's quite a long 2-hour session. Just take a minute to kind of refresh yourself. Okay, and I'm gonna invite questions from the audience. What would be nice is if you could ask your question in the chat, and then I'll ask you, hey, would you like to unmute and ask your question in person? And then you can turn your camera on or your audio on and be present and ask the question. You can direct your question to a specific member of the panel, or you can ask an open question and I can maybe help to direct that to a range of appropriate people, or the panelists can feel free to say, hey, I'd love to jump in and answer that one. So I'll let everybody take a minute to get their questions, and I'm going to go back to Diego's amazing questions. He was asking us to think about maintenance and continuity. And I think that's a really interesting topic, because in my experience, people really want to tell me about projects that they're working on right now. And so these projects get lodged into our repositories, and yeah, we get maybe for those of us in kind of funded projects like me and Creatures, we get maybe a snapshot of a moment in time. But for somebody maybe like Lewis and CCS that's conceptualizing this as kind of an organizational resource, maybe this issue of maintenance is slightly different. So would anyone like to speak to that from the panel? Please go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah, I'm happy to say a bit about this. I think, yeah, it's certainly something that's been on my mind recently, that I think as the library of creative sustainability has got bigger, more and more of the time we spend on it has had to be devoted to maintenance, because there's a lot of detail in there. There's a lot of links that regularly get broken, and other things that have to be updated to stay relevant. So I think it is very important for us that it is a kind of ongoing resource. It's not, it's not meant to be an archive of a particular moment in time, but something that continues to be useful going forward, which does mean, yes, I'm spending a lot of time checking and making sure that things still work, which, yeah, is time consuming and sometimes frustrating, I suppose. And I think increasingly trying to sort of write the articles in a way that tries to build that in a little bit. So trying to think ahead to how something's going to read in 2 years' time or whatever, which we certainly weren't doing when we initially started this, where it was kind of more like, how do we do this? Let's get this set up and just kind of see where it goes. So I think there's been quite a lot of learning about how to write things in a way that means they require a bit less maintenance to stay relevant.
Brilliant. And would anyone else in the panel like to speak on maintenance? I noticed that when Christina and I first met with Daniel and Chloe, they articulated their corpus of creative narratives as a commons. And I thought there was a really interesting kind of ways that the different groups have kind of got stuff into the cases, and how we're sort of seeing these as resources. Kind of who do they belong to when they've been crowdsourced is kind of also a different question.
Yeah, just maybe when you say commons, it's actually risky when you're talking maintenance, because you're supposed to manage the commons. So we've taken the easy road with our library, because it's more on finished works. So you can put them in once, and yeah, a few links will get broken, but it's not that big a problem. People can do search. It's not the same as when you want to make that resource directly usable for somebody who has a project. So, but maybe in some ways, you could think that in some cases, volume can trump this issue. That is, if you have enough resources, one of them might be out of date, but others will be. So it may be more an issue of percentage.
And on maintenance, if I can add, I think what's also interesting is, so in a common tool or the one that we built, such as the library, there's something about making it kind of accessible also to users. And so maintenance is about making it kind of articulating it in a way that someone wouldn't get tired of wanting to participate. You know, it shouldn't take them 50 minutes to kind of understand what the website is about. And so that was kind of the work and the evolution of the resource or of the platform since the beginning, was to try to make it, okay, when I come on this website, how long does it take me to kind of get what I have to do? And if I want to take part in this project, like how do we make it didactical? So it's pretty interesting.
Yes, I would say it was shocking to me how much upfront work we ended up doing to try to get it clear and click through very easily. And I mean, we spent hours and hours and months working on those little details, which now you wouldn't really know from looking at the website, to get the upfront work. And also we made conscious decisions, like don't put any dates, so it doesn't look, I mean, there's, even if it's a great resource, when you go to a project that's a few years old and you see the last time anybody posted was in 2017, you kind of think, wah, wah. So we wanted it to not necessarily be obvious when we had posted the information. But it is a big challenge to keep. Right now we're having some technical difficulties and all of us are busy, and you know, none of us is a kid genius at tech, so it takes a big effort. So luckily we have a core group of really passionate people who are also friends. And so we have multiple motivations to keep it going.
Yeah, this was a beautiful common theme, these core groups of friends who wanted to do stuff together. I think that's been a lovely kind of finding, looking up all these different libraries. So we've got a ton of excellent questions on the chat. I'm going to hand over to Gary to ask his question about evaluation.
Yeah, so this is something I don't see Youst, but I know like Youst has done stuff. So I'll just say an example. I've done a bunch of work on scenario stuff. So people want to do scenario stuff, but the methods are often not have been evaluated. And so if you're trying to pick what to do, and you're working with Inuit in the Canadian Arctic, or farmers in Sweden, or Black small farmers in South Africa, you're working in very different contexts. Your positionality is very different. What kind of method should you use? And so today, many people made a lot of claims about what, or their projects are making claims about what they're doing. And so I'd be really curious, both in projects or in creative practices, is there any kind of checking of like, so say if with our seeds, if a seed saying, yeah, everyone who works with us totally changes their mind and becomes super environmental, I personally would be a little bit skeptical of that claim, but it's really hard to test and evaluate. So if you're trying to code things, so that's just kind of, how do people deal with the issue of their own things they like, how other people can take it and use it in a different context, know the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches, or if they're collecting things and people are making claims about what they've accomplished or done, to what extent do you check or evaluate those claims? And so there's a whole bunch of issues there and just sort of, but it's about kind of quality and usability and transferability. And just how people are thinking about those things in their projects would be really cool.
So let's detangle those three things, because I think that's kind of a mega question, though I love it. Let's think about generalizability, because I think that's a massively important question for us. So we've got some of us, including me and maybe Kelly and Lewis, who are actually trying to sort of maybe cut at least some of the ties of highly situated practices and float them up at least a little bit to sort of point out how they might be appropriable for others. So let's hear from anyone who would like to talk about that. Yep, go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah, yeah, as you say, I think it's a really important thing for us that we want this resource to serve as a way for people to ultimately do similar things themselves. It's meant to be a kind of almost like a DIY guide, like to how you could start doing your own version of this. And I think when we're picking the projects that we include, it's a really key factor for consideration is, are there elements of this which could be replicated, that could be learned from? If it's so specific that it could only work in one situation, then it's not really a right fit for us. But having said that, everything which, all the projects which seem to be really effective do respond closely to their particular context. They respond to, you know, the communities that live in the place operating, what the landscape is like, the particular issues that are at play there. So I think it's a bit of a fine balance, I suppose, between trying to present that case study as it actually exists and how they're responding to these really detailed things that really, really matter and that we should pay attention to, while also trying to extract some of those learnings from it that could be applied in different situations. So I suppose the template that we use tries to kind of account for both of these things. So we have a kind of, I suppose there's two different bits. There's a bit which is called sustainability outcomes, which is, I suppose, trying to look at like, here's exactly what happens as a result of this, and trying to put it quite scientifically or technically or quantitatively, and kind of say like, these are the outcomes in this particular instance. And then there's another bit which is just called lessons, tips and advice, which is much more open and much more qualitative, and just kind of saying, here are like 5 really key things to learn from this project you could take away. And I think those are the bits that we see as being more actively replicable. But I think it's always a very fine balance, I think, between trying to show the detail of that particular context and how that really matters, while also trying to show how you can take things away from it at the same time. And yeah, it's a struggle. I don't think it's ever quite perfect.
Yeah, and I appreciated, Lewis, your humility when you were talking about your projects, and that I think that everybody here has that kind of humility and that embracing of uncertainty that makes it more about tinkering and experimenting than any kind of cookie cutter situation. And I think Diego actually attended one of our workshops on Dare to Suck in designing creative methods. And so, you know, going through like, what's your core purpose and is this appropriate? And having people design first a method that's completely inappropriate to your goal and your target audience and engaging people, and then using some of those kind of fun, surprising pieces that come out of the inappropriate method to then go back and design an appropriate method. So I don't know, just keeping it a bit fun and humble.
Yeah, David and Diego, would you like to add anything? Because you've also kind of worked from these really specific cases and then with the SDGs and pulled out specific interviews.
I can add one thing. I think the focus is in the interface, in my view. It's not the actual repository, in my view. Of course, the repository is very important, but I think it's more important is who is the repository and how to empower the interface, because at the end it's a question of placing that knowledge into a particular context, science in context or art in context. And I think that's the most difficult thing to transform, as Diego put in our last slide, how to turn information into actionable knowledge and engaging emotional knowledge, embodied knowledge. Well, you all know the words. So I think that's the focus is more in the interface, in my view.
Yeah, I think the evaluation question is always a very difficult one to answer. In some ways, it was clear for us from the beginning of working with the arts, we didn't really intend to, evaluate what kind of project works or not, and because also there are different ways. I mean, just evaluation itself means different things within different fields, and I think what we did though, especially in the climate arts catalog, in that one we looked for projects that had publications. And so the idea behind that was that exactly that, are these projects actually putting time to evaluate themselves, the projects, and some of them have. And what we found at that point, we didn't go further into sort of comparing those studies, because I feel that again they use very, very different methods to evaluate. So I wonder how much we can claim just by looking at that. But it's a question that I'm sure it could be really interesting to go further and discuss in more detail, and also learn from different approaches. Sorry, Daniel, I think I see you.
Yeah, just there's probably a difficult balance to reach there, because at the same time that there's we're seeing that there's hundreds of initiatives around the world, but they're also all emerging and trying and tinkering, as someone was saying. And we should be careful of not normalizing them, because all our funders, they want quantitative, verified evaluation, and that might actually kill them. And at the same time, you can't just say, let's forget about the results. So maybe one thing we tend to look at is you base ourselves on the claims of people, of people leading the projects is kind of enough. That is, are you trying to verify that the goals that you've set for yourselves, rather than the goals that others would like to impose on you, are sort of reached, and they can be totally qualitative, and maybe are there ways to sort of check whether these claims are real? So that would be the most I would be trying to look for at this stage, rather than at least try to quantify, or worse, try to impose criteria from outside. Again, and maybe one thing we should both make progress on that, because this is an important aspect, but also make progress on how we could talk funders out of looking for those so comfortable quantitative outcomes that are killing all kind of creativity in that field.
Great. I'm just going to chip in and then hand over to Gary. I think what's been really interesting to learn in the Creatures project is how these kind of strategies or techniques that we've been looking for often just bubble up. They become a new method in one project, and then they're still quite experimental, someone learns about them, then they get another little pot of funding, and they get iterated again, and suddenly they become a bit more stabilized, and maybe on the third pot of funding, their practitioner actually understands, I know what's going on here. And it's really only after a kind of practice has happened quite a few times that it becomes kind of stable enough to kind of forecast what might happen. So I think for me, it's really important, like Daniel said, to kind of nurture the very experimental, offshoots that are kind of percolating, especially in the crowdsourced libraries. And maybe evaluation needs to have a temporal quantity here, that actually it becomes valuable at this point in its life as a seed, or does it? And then actually kind of, that's a really interesting question when we think about disembedding these things and passing them on, because that normally happens when they've kind of taken on a more stable form. But Gary, I want to hand back to you to have your say.
Yeah. So just I'm asking this, of course. these are issues that we've struggled with, and especially, so a couple of things. It's like, we were collecting seeds to use for scenarios, but then we found that a lot of the kind of seeds, or people from these seeds, found a lot of the seeds really interesting. And also that, at least speaking for myself, I kind of realized stuff that maybe seemed a little bit more like old hat, like, oh, community currency, I've heard about that a million times, was totally mind-blowing to other people who weren't professors of sustainability science and doing this for 30 years or whatever. And so that just the existence of these things could be really useful. But then when we make these, we had some crowdsourcing and we had a map. And then we immediately got complaints from people about how projects that people had crowdsourced to us were not good. They were expropriating land, they were defunct, they were some kind of cult that was terrible. And then we realized we needed to have some kind of quality criteria. And then we did, I can't now remember who said it because people are moving around. We kind of had some minimal degree of stability, and that there was sort of sources other than the project about what they were doing as kind of a criteria. So it's not, quantitative assessment, but just like some triangulation, and then to kind of do deeper analysis that there's some more stuff available. And then we've actually been doing stuff too now because we're interested in transformation, of kind of seeing like, what different stuff do we learn from kind of relying on secondary information versus interviews with people? And of course, some things are just the same with secondary, and other things you only get in interviews. But that's, for us, interesting to learn. But we had like all of these issues with kind of people with the crowdsourcing, of people kind of having giving very low quality information, say, and that's, we didn't have we were looking more for creative ideas rather than quality information. But as soon as we started to get a collection, people were assuming we were giving it a stamp of approval. And especially our colleagues at the SRC were saying like, well, if you have this thing, it has to meet like SRC standards. So, it can't be bad in all sorts of ways. So we had struggles dealing with that.
Oh, that's really interesting, and thanks so much for sharing that, Gary. That really enlivens your question a lot. And could I hand over to Dan to ask the next question about audiences?
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I mean, I suppose thanks for really interesting presentations and projects. The thing I was going to ask, I suppose, is a little bit about who is expected to use some of these repositories, and if so, like when, or why, or in what context? Because I think there's some of them, sometimes the act of creating a repository itself can be a sort of, like the act itself is a form of sort of new knowledge, if you like, or research, right? You find commonalities, you find patterns, you do that. In other ways, it's more about just collecting things together that could be an inspiration for other people. Sometimes it could be that it's almost like about sort of best practices, or here's some things we learned, some projects learned from doing things that didn't work, or what others could learn from it. But I think all of those things probably go together. But I'd be really interested to know with maybe a couple of the projects, like who do you see using the repository, and like why or when would they use it? Is it a thing you would use for inspiration, or is it something you'd use as a kind of guide for how to do this sort of stuff, or is it something else entirely for all of them? I guess that might apply to a few of the projects. So I don't know anyone who's interested in that kind of area. Brilliant.
I'd love to intervene and ask maybe if Geoffrey and particularly Roman had something to say. With Mosaic, it seems like you're really thinking a lot about who you're engaging and how. Roman, I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's my experience is really on the process of the deposition of data, or really how you engage people then, and in a crowdsourcing way where participants are free to contribute to that. So at this step, really, I think, well, I brought it in the chat that one should think about what's the gain for the participants, what's he will share something for the common good, but you need to think what he will gain in feedback. So in citizen science, for example, in the hedgehogs example, he will learn about hedgehogs and he will discover something in his garden, and it's creating a data that is beautiful also. So the participation itself as a feedback is a return. The other important thing, I think, is this feeling of belonging to a community of contributors, and through exchanges, through interactions, and so on. So it's, and yeah, that's what I can add at this step. Hope it helps.
Yeah, that's a really lovely kind of set of ideas about crowdsourcing, and maybe the other crowdsourced platforms like Daniel and Chloe's or Gary's could say something.
Yeah, well, we're sort of building the audiences or imagining the audiences as we go, but clearly, yes, the first audience is people who are themselves practitioners and have an interest in sharing that resource. And we've been seeing quite a lot of that. People looking at a specific topic and being interested in co-producing the corpus on mobility or stuff like that. Then that we've been thinking it would be used for research. It wasn't really true, or at least we don't know, which may be the case. It's been used for teaching quite a lot, and this is something that we had in mind, that it would be a resource that it's fairly easy to use, and obviously what we have currently in the database is easier than what most others have, because it's basically stories. So it's quite like easy access and fun. It's easier to access than a whole practice that needs to be discovered. But people have been sort of playing with it or putting it in courses, in futures courses or other kinds of courses. So that's something that we're really interested in. So I would say that the audience is definitely an audience of people who have an interest in reusing the content to do something themselves, to build upon, on a method, on a project, on creating a game or something like that. And we're sort of happy with that.
Yeah, and if I could just also add on to that, it's true that I also believe that right now the audiences, because it's been a bit of work, just putting the platform to date, like we've been continually, we're always working on it and making it kind of more readable and better. And well, we're always exploring on how to create different typologies or different ways that people could use it. And so I do think that, not now yet, because it's pretty much just out, we haven't been promoting it at all, but I do think that it's going to be a good platform for even artists or different users to start, as we were saying, the start of an exploration, as Daniel was saying. But I think it could be useful for, and continuing corpuses, but also creating your own and saying, for example, oh, so I started this exploration on turtles and this, I'd like to ask other people to share kind of their creative works on it. And I think that's going to be useful for that eventually.
Brilliant. We could do one round of the repository holders. Who would like to talk a little bit about their audiences next?
Sure, I could say something. we actually developed the repository because we were so shocked by how much enthusiasm there was for the toolkit, because people used it all over the world. We were getting messages from people that were using just as, even if, and our attitude was, don't just throw a bunch of art at people, use it if it really makes sense. And so people wanted to use arts-based practices, but just needed a place to start. So it just seemed to me like all of us probably are so familiar with this, but then you get outside your bubble and you realize most people are not using arts-based practices, and they just need a little bit of support and help to integrate it into things they're already doing. So that's that.
I would say one thing, I mean, for us it was very clear. We started, in particular, the Arts for Transformations. It's really for a research purpose. So we wanted to collect these in order to understand the role of the arts within the SDGs agenda. But I think the question really made me think about what happens next to these repositories, and what are the possibilities beyond what they are envisioned for, and I noticed that many of our catalogs, they have a kind of a similar structure and so on. So I think there are possibilities for thinking about, we already spoke about the challenges of maintenance, but how can we create spaces that actually might have some other uses beyond what we are envisioning for? And maybe we need to be thinking about sort of an underlying language around how we describe these projects and initiatives.
Yeah, why don't we let Lewis finish on the audiences, and then we could move to that question exactly. It sounds perfect.
That connects a bit to what I wanted to say on this anyway, which is quite neat. But yeah, I suppose I talked a bit about, the audiences we're trying to reach are, I suppose, kind of those on the ground who could take on similar projects themselves primarily. But I think we've had this particular focus on trying to reach the people coming not from the arts and culture side, but I think we've managed to develop quite good connections and support already, but coming from the climate change and kind of environmental practice side, I think we've always struggled to reach a little bit more, and we've kind of tried to tailor things a bit to try and reach that audience. I think a big part of that was language, and trying to get a sense of what kind of language people found off-putting. Like one big thing was sort of using too many adjectives and adverbs, that kind of which was quite interesting specific piece of feedback. We got kind of flowery language that kind of went on about how fabulous things were without actually showing how and why it was fabulous. So I think, which is kind of part of why we tried to adopt this more sort of stripped back style, tried to avoid kind of sector specific terminology unless it was really, really necessary in order to get the point across. And yeah, things like that I think were really important. And I think in terms of just how audiences are using it, I think the way in that we've tended to always, the way it always seems to work with reaching the sort of environmental agencies and organisations in Scotland is normally there's one very keen person who really cares about the arts and creative practice and really wants to make use of those approaches. And if you can reach that person and kind of hand this resource over to them, then it makes a big difference. They have something they can point to and say, look, this practice is established, there are examples of it, it's rigorous, there's this evidence. And kind of arming that one person with the resources to then make the case internally, I think is the thing that we found makes the most difference, kind of finding that key ally and then passing this on to them. So often we found it's not that, it's not huge numbers of people using it, but it's kind of getting to the right people in the right place. It can be quite powerful.
That's a fabulous set of reflections. I love it. Flowery language of the creatives. It's too good. Joffrey, I realized we hadn't asked you about your audiences, and I'm super curious who you imagine will come and read the shared stories of the students. If you're still there with us, Joffrey. Okay, no worries. Well, I will finish up by saying that I think I've realized that like Diego, the first audience for my collection was myself as an analyst to try and make sense. And only now I'm sort of pivoting more to say, okay, how can I sort of share these things back to creative practitioners in a really useful way? And I'm sort of in version 1 beta testing, where I just put things up and then I guess ask some friends, as this is one of the primary kind of evaluative practices, right? It's like this play testing. Hey, can you come and put your eyes on this and give me some informal feedback? But I want to turn back to Diego's question. What can we do together with all these repositories? And I was thinking about medical reviews, like in the UK, the Cochrane Review, which kind of takes all the review papers and makes like the master review. And I was wondering, are there ways that we might to practically work together to have more informal sessions of sharing, like these questions about language, how Diego says, how do we start calling ourselves similar things so that people understand what we're doing is a thing? Lewis is saying, well, actually language is massively important in terms of who we reach. There are just so many similarities for me in kind of research orientations. I'm thinking about the Creatures work and Kelly's work, for example. These kind of foci are incredibly similar. And again, Gary's brought up the donut, that we are all thinking about this. If we don't have the same definitions of transformations, we're all thinking about just and safe operating spaces for humanity. So I do think there's an incredible synergy there in what we've seen. So my question to the panelists and audiences is kind of, what next? What would you guys like to work on together? Please go for it, Chloe.
I was just going to bounce back on that. I just had a crazy impulsion, but to bounce back on that question of kind of common languages, because I think that's something really important in terms that we're all using, and it might mean something else. But that could be something to work on, but it might not even be language, but it can be, I was thinking like, because when you were talking about transformation, you were doing this, it can be like symbols, or, there could be some kind of, this is a crazy idea of language or ways to create different typologies for some words, like some words that we all use continuously could have this reference or a similar reference, or I don't know. It's the start of an idea.
Love that. And I see you ready to pounce, David, with your mute is off and you're ready to go.
But I'll let Gary go first.
Okay, just a couple of things relating to what Sam before. So in our Seeds project, we're not like some big top-down thing, and we didn't start trying to make a collection per se, but we then got interested as where people were useful, thought this was useful, and so we're very interested in comparing seeds, but we've done this with different questions, and it's actually inside our project, which has, like I say, way more sharing stuff and goals than this collection of things. Actually, people still have different questions, and it's different working with food seeds in Sweden than in South Africa. I probably don't need to explain all the ways it's different. People like South Africans, one of the most unequal societies in the world. Sweden is one of the most equal. Most farmers probably make more money than I do, and that's definitely not the case in South Africa. So the questions, the variables, the factors that matter are different between these places. So what we've been doing in our project is we've had now quite a long time trying to think, can we have some kind of hierarchical structure where we have some kind of common core set of things that we all address, which is pretty minimal, and then try and make some kind of other modules which are totally open and people could do whatever they want, but are shareable across projects. So if people are working on food, maybe we code some of the food things in the same way, or you like use the same language to think about the agricultural production or the food supply chains or something, but maybe have some more culturally different things that would be in Sweden versus South Africa or Japan or something. So what I'm suggesting kind of for this group, I think it's really cool to compare and collaborate. I'm skeptical that it's actually even useful to agree on a common language. Maybe I'm at the Stockholm Resilience Center. Resilience is one of these words where 1 million people use it and have totally different definitions. And I'm the kind of person who thinks that's not a bad thing. I think some people want everything to be defined, but I think it's useful to be different and have interpretations. But I think then it's good to think, well, what are the interesting comparisons? And the comparisons don't have to make everyone be the same. It can also be about articulating the differences and what are the different goals in looking at these things? What are the different perspectives, the different theories of change? And I think that's really more interesting than trying to say like what's the same, because we have some similarities, but what are all the differences? So yeah, that's my contribution, and just saying that there's also like a lot of other collections of things. I was just looking on our website and I can't find it on our new version of the website, but like what's also interesting, like landscape architects, corporate sustainability, there's some overlap, but they have different goals and everything. And it's interesting to look at these different collections of things and see what are the different elements and how they're using things. But that can also help you reflect on the criteria you're using to, like, or any of us. So I think this kind of thinking about how we're the same, how we're the different is a really neat thing to do. But that can be about content, processes, goals, context, all those different types of things.
Thank you. Yeah, well, just a couple of things. In my view, also transformations always start with a vision. So perhaps this group could help us to create that common vision, and also related to continuity. Continuity only happens when you have when you create a community of practice around some kind of common interest. I'm very much interested in common knowledge, open knowledge systems and practices, and this basically being organized around particular needs or practice, and in a way that also generates short-term benefits as well, long-term. So if people cannot get something relatively in the next few months, people disappear. So it's also combining this win-win. I've been working a lot on these win-win ideas, although being very much criticized for that as well. But you have to be a little bit strategic as well, and so. From my experience also working also in Brussels a little bit, people are very much interested in transformations, but they don't know how. And the actual implementation is very hard. And basically at the end, people working on transformations become quite marginalized. So perhaps just one thing which I think is important here, my view, is to place this type of work, which for me is what drives me actually here, is how can we make it really useful? Having worked quite a lot on science and seeing the limitations of conventional science and knowledge practices, here we have an opportunity with the amount of crisis coming out now on the table. We have the current crisis. We just came out of COVID. So there's so much space there that we can generate alternative ways of thinking and acting, or being in the world. And I think that's one possibility here that we can think through with this group, how to upscale and generate multiple synergies, multiplicative synergies between them. And I think that's opportunity, but at the end, this needs facilitation and effort.
Yeah, just maybe two things. When we sort of started this discussion with Creatures, there was that kind of the idea that maybe there would be a commons where a lot of those projects could be listed across repositories, and the more we work on it, the more I'm not sure, because I mean, it could be a dream if it would be easily achievable, but it's probably a logistical and nightmare to actually achieve. And I think we all can very much relate on the fact that it needs to be fun as well, and not just like a huge load that we drop on ourselves. But there's maybe two other things that sort of relate as well to what Chloe was saying about the project on collective practices that we launched, and which also resembles some of your projects. The first one is that by interacting among ourselves and maybe among also facilitating interaction among some of the people that are in our lists, there's a number of common issues that we can identify and maybe work on. I mean, we've already mentioned a few, and there's messiness in our projects, in our lists, and messiness in the projects that we refer to as well. And these are, I mean, it's inherent, but as well, in some cases, we could actually learn so as to make the next mistake rather than the previous one. So the idea that maybe there's a kind of field of practice that's trying to emerge, and that could, grow wiser, at least, and at the same time bigger. And the second, and it's a half form idea as well, a little bit like Chloe's idea that maybe we could do that, and would be that behind those lists, there's actually groups and experiments and people, and that if you add them all, which you can't really do, but anyway, it's quite a huge community. It's a large group of people who in many ways are pursuing common goals. So how could, without building a tool, but how could that lead to information interactions and collaboration and common visibility, and I don't know exactly what, but if we thought of the community that's behind all those listings, it's big, and it's probably made out of 98.9% of amazing people. So, wow.
Yeah, brilliant. I think what I'm hearing is that there is a huge potential for comparison, that we should pay attention to not only consensus but dissensus, that we need to respect difference when we're doing our comparative work that's possible. And Gary mentioned kind of geography and culture and sectorial kind of differences. I think it's 2022, and Daniel's extremely right that we want to do things that are fun. We want to do things that are strategically bringing us joy and that aren't kind of too much work. And I can see how things like just sharing our taxonomies into a Google document is like a really nice way to just maybe we do a bit of scrapbooking and we just see our materials together beside each other, or we could have some informal conversations. Since we have 5 minutes left, perhaps we should say a little bit of something about what, if anyone's interested in either doing some things or being invited to do some things. I will leave a little bit of open time now. If you would like to have another conversation or put your taxonomies on a Google Doc or catch up for a Zoom coffee. You don't have to say it out loud. You can say it in the chat or to email to me later on.
I have a quick question for Diego and the transformations community. It seems like transformations has really around the world been trying to promote different types of radical arts integrated practices. So I don't know if there would be, if that would make sense as a spin-off from that to have a Zoom coffee, regular Zoom coffee or something like this. Should be fun.
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, there is a catalog being formed around the transformations, and it will go on a transformations community website. But I think that will be super helpful. I think my comment to Lara, actually, just to clarify, before I realized that when I meant language, I was actually just thinking very technically, because in the end, what we have are spreadsheets. Of course, like it just said, these are projects, these are people, but in the end, we do have these spreadsheets with all of these projects. And I was wondering whether there will be a point for us to share across our taxonomies, as Lara is inviting. So I think that could be a really interesting next step, and just continue this conversation, really, because I feel that we do need to sort of deepen a little bit more and explore and think about together what are the possibilities. But as certainly from the transformations community, there's that intention of and perhaps we could host the next one and then go from there, and as a way to continue this group.
Yeah, the transformations conference attracted over 600 people, so it's quite large as well.
Brilliant. Well, let's go to Gary for the last comment, and then I'll just say thanks to everyone.
Okay, sure. Just one of the things I'm really interested in is also like this kind of methods exchange, which is kind of what I was asking earlier. And so one of the things like that I've been interested in for a while is we've kind of had these kind of seeds character sheets, which I think is more like use term for them that we've used in workshops. They haven't been really character sheets, but just like the metaphor. But we've been trying to kind of create. We've done these kind of week-long workshops, but we've also done these kind of little scenario futures things in like in transformations conferences in like half an hour or 45 minutes. And so I'm really interested in comparing and learning, not critical in the sense of like analyzing, but like what are the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches, like the methods exchange. And this, I think I put in the chat, like the evaluating or comparing methods is one of the big gaps in all this kind of creative futuring or whatever you want to call it, thinking about change things. And so and this can be in all sorts of things. So I have a student, at least this guy work with me making like tarot card things, but it's also about yeah, all these different types of methods. So that's something I would be really interested in a little bit more than the taxonomy of how we classify projects. Like what are different methods that people use to be creative about the world. So it's something, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. And some of us are using our methods as our classifiers. So it's like a less boring form of taxonomy. So I think it would be a really good idea for us to keep talking, and I can do that. I'm not sure what the GDPR implications of emailing onto general participant lists, but basically whatever comes out of this, we can post it on the Creatures website. So if you're interested, I will contact the participants by email. And if we form ourselves into another discussion session, then I'll put it also on the Creatures website, so that you can find it there. And maybe there's also scope for more stuff as part of the wonderful agoras and working groups that Plurality University also really regularly organize. And you can check their website and their social media channels as well for lots of other really wonderful upcoming events on similar themes. So really a huge thanks to all of the presenters who've taken the time to come and share about their project. I've definitely learned a lot, and I hope you have. And also to the audience for coming along and asking some super insightful questions. And let's look forward to getting together again. I don't know if Daniel and Chloe, you want to say anything?
I think you did a wonderful conclusion, and I don't have that much to add. But yes, of course, we're also going to post the video. So I have a blank to say this word in English at the moment. Anyways, but it will be on our website, and we're also, a lot of people have asked us also for your PowerPoints of your presentation. If you feel comfortable with sending it to the public, don't hesitate to send it to us, and we'll create a document and send it to the list of participants. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for organizing and inviting us all.
Thank you.
Thank you.